Life can change in the blink of an eye. Sometimes one impulsive decision sets an unstoppable chain of events into motion. Richard Donovan, a reputed millionaire known for his successful business ventures and lavish lifestyle, made such a choice one rainy evening. In a moment of anger and betrayal, he kicked his pregnant wife, Serena, out of their mansion. Little did he know that very act would shatter both of their worlds, and months later, an unexpected twist would make him question every decision he had ever made. This is the story of heartbreak, resilience, redemption, and the power of unforeseen second chances. Richard Donovan was the kind of man you read about in glossy magazines. Powerful, wealthy, and infinitely self-assured. Born to modest beginnings in the town of Hollingsworth, a humble suburb outside Chicago, he built his fortune in real estate before diversifying into several lucrative tech startups. He was hailed in local business journals as the man who could spot a prime opportunity from a mile away. There were rumors he rarely slept, consumed by an unending hunger for success. For a long time, his ambition seemed untouchable, and so did he. But hidden beneath his polished exterior lay a man whose insecurities went far deeper than anyone could imagine. He had been raised by a father whose own temper and unrelenting drive had shaped Richard to believe that the world was cruel. Money to Richard was more than a means to comfort. It was a shield that protected him from the humiliations and hardships he had experienced in his youth. Wealth meant respect. And respect, he believed, could solve almost every problem life threw at him. Yet for all his accomplishments, Richard was lonely at the top. His relationships came and went like fleeting seasons. Lavish parties, business galas, and expensive gifts might have brought temporary warmth, but they never led to lasting companionship. Not until he met Serena Montoya. Serena was unlike the people in Richard's typical orbit. She hadn't grown up around wealth. Her father, Michael Whitmore, was a high school teacher, and her mother, Angela, had worked at a local bakery. Through scholarships and part-time jobs, Serena put herself through college, graduating near the top of her class in journalism. Her passion for uncovering human interest stories caught the eye of one of Richard's philanthropic foundations when she interviewed him for a segment on philanthropic outreach in the community. The first time Richard laid eyes on Serena, he saw more than a pretty face. In her, he witnessed kindness, curiosity, and a selfless spirit he had seldom encountered. The rest, as they would later say, was a whirlwind of emotion and romance. Within a year, they were married in a grand ceremony that media outlets ate up. The headlines declared the union a fairy tale story, showcasing how small-town sincerity could blend with a life of big-city glamour. For a while, it was bliss. Serena loved that Richard could be gentle, thoughtful, and fiercely protective. Richard cherished that Serena never seemed impressed by his money. She loved him for the person he was, not the lifestyle he provided. Together, they were unstoppable. Richard, the formidable businessman, and Serena, the compassionate journalist, making waves by championing charities and standing up for causes close to her heart. But behind closed doors, trouble brewed. Richard's obsession with his work started to overshadow their marriage. He spent longer hours at the office, traveling frequently for high-level mergers, rarely taking the time to appreciate Serena's successes. Meanwhile, Serena grew restless. She'd abandoned her career as a journalist to support Richard's philanthropic ventures. She had hoped to weave her passions into their shared life's work, but soon realized that her voice within the Donovan empire was stifled. On a snowy December afternoon, Serena discovered she was pregnant. Elation filled her heart. For the first time, she felt a sense of purpose beyond her philanthropic duties. She prepared a special dinner, freshly made lasagna, candlelight, the works, to share the news with Richard. However, he arrived home hours late, fuming about a major deal that had gone sideways because of an incompetent business associate. By the time she mustered the courage to tell him about the pregnancy, his mind was too clouded with anger to fully grasp the significance. Over the next few days, Richard tried to be supportive, but his own anxieties consumed him. Thoughts about fatherhood, legacy, and potential distractions from his business empire weighed heavily. Instead of celebrating the pregnancy with Serena, he grew more distant, worrying about how a baby would derail him from crucial expansions and acquisitions. Serena, who initially believed a child would bring them closer, felt neglected and confused. One night, as the wind howled outside and winter's chill settled in, a massive argument erupted. It began trivially about finances. For a new foundation Serena wanted to start in her hometown, but escalated until old wounds and resentments poured out. Serena accused Richard of being self-centered and emotionally absent. Richard shot back that she was trying to overshadow his achievements with her philanthropic passion and meddling in his financial decisions. In a moment of blinding fury, with doors slamming and voices echoing off marble floors, Richard yelled the unimaginable, "Get out of my house!" He jabbed his finger at the entrance as lightning cracked in the distance. Stunned, Serena could only stare. Tears streamed down her cheeks, yet she refused to beg. Without another word, she grabbed a coat, her purse, and vanished into the storm. Richard stood there, chest heaving with rage, not fully grasping what he had done. An hour later, the house was cold and silent. Thunder rattled the windows, but the mansion felt emptier than ever, though a small voice inside told him to call Serena, to chase her down, to apologize. His pride whispered otherwise. He had given the order, she had left. To him, that confirmed she never really wanted to stay. He convinced himself he was better off alone. Over the next few weeks, Serena's absence settled in. At first, Richard told himself he'd done the right thing. He couldn't let anyone disrupt his drive for success. But late at night, he recalled her trembling shoulders as she walked out the door. Memories of her gentle laughter and the way she championed his charitable foundations gnawed at him. They had never even discussed the pregnancy in a calm way. On his dresser lay the ultrasound photo she'd tried to show him the night of their biggest fight. Stubborn as he was, Richard didn't reach out. Friends and associates asked after Serena, but he gave vague responses. She's with her family, dealing with personal matters. In reality, he had no clue where she had gone. Over time, her name was less often mentioned in his social circles. The world moved on, as it always does. But one person refused to move on, Serena herself. Having grown up in simpler surroundings, she wasn't afraid to start from scratch. She reached out to her old mentor at a local broadcasting station, Harriet Lang, who had once told her that her gift for storytelling was unique. Harriet was more than glad to help Serena find a path forward. After all, Serena was resourceful and driven, pregnant or not. Serena landed a gig producing investigative segments for a small cable news channel in Chicago. Her early pieces showcased everyday heroes, teachers, community organizers, mothers fighting for better childcare. She stayed mostly out of the spotlight. She had no desire to be on camera initially. The heartbreak of her broken marriage weighed heavily on her, leaving her uncertain about her future. But Harriet pushed her further. "You have a voice, Serena. Don't hide it." Despite the stress of building a new career and preparing for the baby, Serena found solace in her work. She poured herself into each story, focusing on the experiences of others rather than her own woes. Slowly, she gained recognition for her empathy and meticulous research. Though money was tight, she never complained. Her father, Michael Whitmore, helped her navigate small but essential comforts, making sure she had what she needed for the baby. Her mother, Angela, frequently delivered home-cooked meals and accompanied her to doctor's appointments. When the time came for her to give birth, Serena named her son Gabriel after an uncle who had been an anchor of love in her childhood. Holding Gabriel in her arms, she felt a new surge of courage. She had not told Richard about Gabriel's birth, partly because she felt he had forfeited his right to know by throwing her out, but also she was afraid of how he might react. Was there even room for a child in his hectic, success-obsessed life? Time passed. Serena balanced motherhood and her emerging career in journalism. On the screen, she began reporting segments featuring everyday injustices and heroic stories alike. She had a knack for drawing out the raw emotions in an interview, forging genuine connections with her subjects. Soon, she caught the eye of a larger station that offered her a weekly human interest slot. Though it didn't pay nearly what Richard's wealth could have afforded her, it gave her something money could never buy: independence, integrity, and self-worth. Meanwhile, Richard's empire expanded. On the surface, business boomed. He closed deals in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, showcasing an uncanny ability to predict market shifts. His net worth soared, landing him on major financial magazine covers. Associates marveled at his composure under pressure. He was unstoppable, a symbol of ruthless ambition and undeniable success. But inside, Richard was battling his demons. He often caught himself reminiscing about Serena, her laughter, the glow in her eyes whenever she spoke about a story that moved her. Late at night, he scrolled through her social media, which remained surprisingly sparse. She posted updates about her investigative segments, but nothing personal. He wondered constantly if she'd had the baby, if the child was healthy. He replayed that awful night in his mind, feeling more guilt each time. Where was Serena living? How was she supporting herself? A voice in the back of his head told him to find her, to apologize, to confess he still loved her despite everything. Yet his pride, bolstered by the demands of a relentless business schedule, chained him to inaction. Months turned into nearly a year. It was an unremarkable Tuesday morning when Richard found himself alone in the breakfast nook of his penthouse suite, flipping through channels aimlessly. The coffee in his cup turned cold as he scrolled past various news programs until something caught his attention. The lower third caption on a local Chicago station read, "A beacon of hope, Serena Montoya and her mission to uplift forgotten voices." Instantly, his heart lurched. He leaned in, eyes glued to the screen. There she was, his wife Serena, wearing a modest blazer and holding a microphone with the station's insignia. Her dark hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her eyes sparkled with determination as she interviewed a group of single mothers fighting for better housing conditions. The camera zoomed out at one point, showing Serena at a podium during a community rally. The crowd cheered as she spoke passionately about accountability, justice, and change. Stunned, Richard stared as though in a trance. She was on television, on a respected local network, championing the causes she had always cared about. And she looked radiant, stronger, and more assured than ever before. A pang of regret struck him so hard that he nearly dropped his mug. He realized how much he missed her, how wrong he had been to shut her out, and how he had, in his arrogance, assumed she could never forge her own path without his wealth. The segment also showed short glimpses of Serena's new life, though it didn't reveal much about her personal circumstances. There was no mention of a child on air that day, but Richard's heart hammered in his chest, wondering if she had carried the pregnancy to term. If so, that would mean he had a son or daughter in the world, a child he had never seen, never held. How could he have let his pride overshadow his sense of responsibility? Urgency kicked in. Richard called his personal assistant, demanding to know everything about Serena's new job. With his vast resources, it wasn't hard to track down the name of her mentor, Harriet Lang, and the small cable station she'd initially worked for. Within days, Richard had compiled an entire dossier of Serena's last several months. the stories she covered, the charities she sponsored, and any events she attended publicly. Photos revealed that, indeed, she had been pregnant and had given birth. He saw no images of a baby, though Serena had kept that private. The revelation tore him apart. For weeks, he wrestled with the best way to approach her. Part of him wanted to barge into the station unannounced and declare his love, but a wiser voice reminded him that the damage he had done might not be so easily undone. He decided on a gentler path, a letter, handwritten, as he knew Serena appreciated sincere gestures. In it, he poured out his remorse, apologizing for his cruelty and pride. He explained that he had thrown himself deeper into his business to avoid confronting his pain, and in the process, lost the one person who truly understood him. He concluded by saying he wanted to meet and talk, acknowledging her right to refuse. Once the letter was complete, he slipped it into a crisp envelope with her name. Instead of sending a courier, he delivered it himself to the reception desk at the local station. He recognized Harriet Lang in a hallway, but Harriet politely turned away, a frosty expression on her face clearly. The staff had no love left for him. Still, he did not leave until he was certain the letter was passed along to Serena. Days went by without a response. Every hour felt like a lifetime. Richard feared he had sealed his fate and that Serena wanted nothing to do with him. He considered texting her, calling, or even sending flowers by the dozen, but something in him resisted such grand gestures. He sensed that if she responded at all, it would only be on her terms. Finally, late on a Wednesday afternoon, he received a simple text message from an unknown number. "We'll meet you at the Old Lighthouse Cafe, Thursday 3 p.m. Come alone, Serena." Heart pounding, he texted back a quick confirmation. Sleep was elusive that night. Anxiety and anticipation tangoed in his thoughts. Thursday arrived, wet and dreary. The rain battered the windows of Richard's Mercedes as he parked near the Lighthouse Cafe, a small, cozy diner near the harbour where they used to go for clandestine dates before they were married. He recalled how Serena would dip her fries into hot chocolate, an odd but endearing habit. Entering the cafe, he found it practically empty except for a waitress behind the counter. In a corner booth, Serena sat waiting, her eyes fixed on the harbour outside the window. She turned when he approached. He barely recognized her. Yes, it was Serena, the woman he'd fallen in love with, but there was a gravity to her demeanor that spoke volumes about the battles she had faced. She had changed, hardened, perhaps, by heartbreak, but also emboldened by independence. They exchanged awkward pleasantries, and Richard asked if she wanted anything. She shook her head. "No, I'm good." He ordered coffee just to have something to do with his hands. When he tried to speak, she held up a hand, signaling for him to wait. She began with a simple statement, "I never expected to hear from you again." Her voice trembled only slightly, revealing the emotion beneath her otherwise calm exterior. She continued, recounting the night he threw her out and the tumult she endured in the following months. She told him about living in a cramped studio until she found stable work, about her mentor Harriet's unwavering support, and about the day Gabriel arrived into her life. The mention of Gabriel made Richard's heart clench. "So, I have a son?" he asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Serena nodded, tears forming. "Yes, you do. Gabriel Donovan, almost 9 months old now." Shame and sorrow collided within him. He reached out to take her hand, but she pulled away, gripping her own arms. "Don't," she said. "Don't think you can just show up and fix this with words. I want you to know what happened to me after that night, to understand how you let your temper overshadow everything we built together." Richard listened, cheeks burning with guilt. She explained that she wasn't sure if she wanted him involved in Gabriel's life. She had struggled alone emotionally. Financially, though, her parents helped when they could. Yet she didn't blame him for all her hardships. She had emerged stronger and more capable than before. In a way, she sighed, you made me prove to myself that I can stand on my own feet. But the pain you caused, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. He told her about the endless nights he replayed that fight, about how his arrogance had blinded him. I was scared, he confessed, surprising himself with the admission. My father was not a kind man, and I worried I'd turn into him. I thought burying myself in business would make those fears disappear. He paused, glancing at her. But then I realized, letting fear control me did exactly that, made me cruel, just like him. Silence enveloped the small cafe. The waitress busied herself at the far end of the counter, pretending not to eavesdrop. Eventually, Serena swallowed hard. She spoke about how she had decided, for Gabriel's sake, to move forward in life without holding on to resentment. But that did not guarantee a place for Richard. I'm open to discussing custody if you genuinely want to be a father, she said. But as far as we're concerned, I can't jump back into marriage. He nodded, tears welling up. I just want a chance, he pleaded. A chance to prove I can be more than what I was. Let me be there for Gabriel financially, emotionally, however you decide. Let me try to make amends. Serena inhaled deeply, her guard momentarily lowering. I won't stand in your way, she said. He's your son too, but understand, I'm not interested in your money. Gabriel has everything he needs. If you want to be part of his life, do it wholeheartedly, as his father, not as some wealthy benefactor. He agreed. Though her tone remained measured, he sensed a fragile willingness to let him see Gabriel. They finished the conversation with a plan to meet at Serena's apartment the following weekend, so he could be properly introduced to his son. No promises of reconciliation were made. And while Richard yearned for more her love, her forgiveness, he understood the magnitude of the breach he'd created. In the weeks that followed, Richard was determined to take it step by step. The first time he laid eyes on Gabriel was in Serena's modest living room, scattered with baby toys. Gabriel was crawling on the floor, exploring a plush dinosaur. Unsure, trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement, Richard lowered himself onto the rug. The child looked up, eyes inquisitive, and giggled. In that tiny moment, Richard felt a rush of love he'd never known was possible. His son. Serena hovered close by, protective. But as Gabriel reached for Richard's outstretched hand, it was clear this was an extraordinary moment, a father connecting with his child for the first time. Tears slipped from Richard's eyes, and he didn't care to hide them. That day marked the beginning of a new journey. He vowed to be present, to let fatherhood transform his priorities. Business deals suddenly felt less urgent. Daily calls to check on Gabriel became more critical than any board meeting. Serena watched this transformation with cautious optimism. She had known Richard at his best, a loving, affectionate partner, and at his worst, a man who allowed pride to overshadow love. Slowly, she gave him small glimpses of trust. She allowed him to babysit Gabriel while she ran errands, introduced him to some of her new friends from the station, and even let him watch her produce one of her live segments, though she kept a professional distance on set. In turn, Richard did everything he could to support her, not just financially, but emotionally. He offered to pay for a better apartment, but she refused, insisting on doing things her way. Instead, he helped by finding a reputable childcare center near her new workplace, only after she approved, of course. He made sure to respect her boundaries, a lesson he learned the hard way. Word spread in social circles that Richard Donovan, the famously ruthless mogul, had softened. Business associates noticed he was more patient, more willing to compromise. They attributed this to fatherhood, but nobody knew the deeper truth. Richard was finally facing his own failings and trying to be a better man because he almost lost the person who taught him how to love in the first place. The months following their reunion were not without challenges. Serena struggled to balance her desire for independence with the practicalities of co-parenting. Richard sometimes slipped into old habits, trying to assert control or fix problems with money. But each time, he recognized the pattern and corrected himself. He leaned on therapy and personal introspection to confront the scars from his childhood. Serena, meanwhile, continued to climb the journalistic ladder, even receiving an offer to co-anchor a primetime news segment focusing on underrepresented communities. Gradually, she allowed Richard into her heart again, in small increments. There were moments of laughter and camaraderie, like when they attended a charity gala together, not as husband and wife, but as co-parents, determined to raise awareness for families in need. Cameras flashed, headlines circulated, and speculation ran rampant about a possible reconciliation. But Serena and Richard ignored the gossip, focusing instead on providing Gabriel with a supportive environment. One late spring day, Richard invited Serena and Gabriel to a newly built community center he had funded in her hometown. Serena had lobbied local officials for programs that would help underprivileged children, and Richard had quietly made sure the finances went through. As the two cut the ribbon together, the press capturing every moment, an air of hope surrounded them. Later, in a private room away from the reporters, Richard handed Serena an envelope. Inside was a certificate establishing the Montoya Foundation, fully funded in Serena's name, dedicated to supporting aspiring journalists from low-income backgrounds. Serena's eyes glistened. "This is for you," he said softly, "and for all the stories you'll help bring to light. I know you don't need my money, but I wanted to honor what you stand for." Serena pressed her lips together, emotion overwhelming her. She thanked him, not with words, but with a brief embrace that spoke volumes. For the first time since that stormy night, she allowed herself to envision a future where they might not only co-parent, but stand side by side as equals. That evening, as she tucked Gabriel into bed, Serena reflected on how far they had come. The heartbreak was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind, but she could see a path toward healing. Richard had done more than apologize. He had changed, not just for her, but for himself and for Gabriel. She had never wanted to strip him of his ambition. She only wished he would learn to care for the people around him as much as he cared for his success. The moment that truly shattered the last of her walls came a few weeks later. Serena's mother, Angela, had been hospitalized with pneumonia, and Serena was overwhelmed trying to juggle her job, caring for Gabriel, and managing hospital visits. Without prompting, Richard stepped in. He drove Serena to the hospital, sat with Angela for hours, brought her father Michael warm meals, and ensured the bills were handled discreetly without fanfare. One night, as Angela's fever spiked, Serena feared the worst. She called Richard in a panic. He rushed to the hospital, took Gabriel from her arms so she could comfort her mother, and told her father to rest while he stood guard. Angela recovered, thankfully, and Serena realized that the man who had once yelled at her to leave was now her rock in a crisis. It was a stunning reversal, and it melted the last shards of resentment in her heart. Weeks later, on a sun-kissed Saturday, Richard, Serena, and Gabriel strolled through a park near Lake Michigan. They laughed as Gabriel toddled unsteadily on the grass, squealing at the sight of ducks. At one point, he fell and began to cry. Both parents rushed to pick him up, their hands colliding. Caught in the moment, their eyes locked. Serena saw regret and love in Richard's gaze. Richard saw compassion and understanding in hers. Neither spoke. They both softly held their son, calming him until he giggled again. It would still take time, but they both knew what lay before them, a chance for a genuine, renewed partnership. Not the fairy tale wedding spectacle that once graced tabloids, but a real grown-up love built on empathy, forgiveness, and mutual respect. If the day came that they officially reunited, it would be on this firmer foundation. When Serena's next major broadcast aired, She spoke about the importance of forgiveness, citing stories of families torn apart and later reunited under difficult circumstances. She didn't share her personal details, but she ended with a poignant statement: "Sometimes the hardest work we do is in our own hearts. And if we're willing to do that work, we open doors to transformation for ourselves and for the ones we love." Watching from the comfort of his living room, Gabriel asleep in a crib nearby, Richard felt the weight of those words. He was ready to continue that work, not because he wanted a redemption story for the cameras, but because he had finally learned to value love above pride. He remembered the first time he saw her on TV after kicking her out, how regret tore through him. Now, though, as he watched the same woman speak with such conviction, he felt something else: hope. Hope that even broken bonds could be mended, that a man obsessed with success could learn to prioritize family, and that a woman wounded by betrayal could find it in her heart to believe again. They had walked through fire and come out tempered, scarred, but not defeated, and maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest success of all. What a journey it has been, an epic tale of heartbreak, ambition, and the power of second chances. We witnessed how Richard Donovan's pride nearly cost him everything he cherished, and how Serena found her own strength when life pushed her to the edge. Their path was rocky, full of tears, regret, and relentless determination. But through it all, they discovered that genuine transformation is possible when love becomes stronger than fear. If you found yourself cheering for Serena, empathizing with Richard, or simply caught up in the twists and turns of their story, then please let us know. Like this video, share it with friends who need a dose of drama and hope, and subscribe to this channel for more gripping stories and real-life lessons. Your support means the world to us. And remember, everyone deserves a second chance. Keep believing, keep hoping, and keep watching,